For the rhetorical reading notes, I want to take a few moments to walk through some possible kinds of answers as you think about how to use this. The most important takeaway, I think, is really twofold here at the beginning. First and foremost, these rhetorical reading notes should be helpful for you, and they should be good notes in the sense they prepare you to do something else. So that is, you're not just checking a box. You're not just turning in work and saying, here are my notes. Secondly, think about the fact that you're really preparing for the rhetorical analysis that you're about to draft. So this is kind of the A step to that B step. If you're taking notes and they answer these questions that are really pointed, then when you answer the question about the rhetorical analysis prompt, you're able to have information at hand when you write that because you've already done the critical thinking in preparation for that task. So if you want to take your language from your answers in the rhetorical reading notes and use that inside of your rhetorical analysis, yeah, that makes sense. A sentence here, a sentence there, but remember, you want to make sure it's cohesive. You want to make sure it's not just copied and pasted and put into some of the documents. So as we walk through the, I'll use the prompt here for the rhetorical reading notes for Abrams. The instructions are always going to be the same. So you're trying to understand the text and how it works, not just as a singular text, a chapter, a piece of paper in front of you, but how it works in context, in a larger history, in the academic conversation to which it contributes and in which it participates. So these questions are guided to help you to think about that. You'll notice that you receive points on a rubric for your answers. 0 is incomplete or unacceptable, 1 is you're right, and 2 is you're right, and wow, great additional things. You're thinking about it in a way that's not just about being correct, but about being useful. So the first question, title and year of publication. Well, this matters, right? If something was published in 2006, that's different than 1906. So when you put it in the publication, remember, for MLA, chapter titles take quotes, italics take, book titles take italics, and you kind of want the year too. So think about this, chapter title, book title, and I always capitalize my second letter there, so there we go, italics for that. And it's just a real simple way of making sure that's different, and the reader knows it's the right thing. The second question, this is the more difficult question for some students. The question is not really who is the author, for example, Abrams. Who is the author is, well, Abrams is the name of the person, but who is that person? What's his background? How does he create ethos or credibility in the text? So when you think about that, when you think about what does it mean to be an author about constitutional law in the United States, what expertise must this author have to be able to write about it in such a profound way? So if you write the author is Abrams, period, yeah, you're right, but is that helpful? Does it offer you additional information to start making connections? If not, well, you could take it a step further. Primary audience. Well, this is a question of pathos, right? Who is the audience and how does the author address them? Is the level of language sophisticated? Is it appropriate for an academic audience? Or is it more public? Does it have citations in it? Is it scholarly or is it available to anybody? Does it have a list of references? Do they use a lot of acronyms or jargon, or is it written for anyone who picks up the book? Think about where you'd find the book. A Barnes & Noble, a library bookstore, behind a paywall for a journal. These kinds of things tell you who an audience is, right? If someone at Publix is reading this, or Barnes & Noble, and you see someone reading at a college campus, you might say, well, it's a pretty wide audience. But if it's published in a journal, like the Bartolome article, that's a pretty narrow audience. If the journal's called Basic Composition, who do you think might read that journal? And that's what you're trying to get at. Who is the primary audience here? And how do you know it? Genre. The text genre. So, for example, if you know a chapter comes from a book and it's nonfiction, you could write nonfiction. You can write anything you really want here as long as you justify it. How do you know that it's a scholarly text, an academic text? How do you know that it's whatever you think it is? Think about like music or movies here. Netflix can name a bunch of different genres for us. They're not necessarily quote-unquote real genres, but they help us to think about what the expectations are for the audience, and this really matters. Next, the topic. If you can name the topic in one sentence, you can summarize this text pretty succinctly. And so being able to do that is a handy tool, especially as you're explaining the text in the next step. The thesis. In a sentence or two, state the central argument. So in Bartolome's Inventing the University, the author argues that blah, 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 blah. Something that you think summarizes it, almost like a sentence that wraps around the entire text and includes all the main ideas in one sentence, okay? Logos. As we start getting more into the rhetorical elements here, think about what these actually mean. hesitate to call these things logical appeals or emotional appeals or other things. Logos just means logic, right? But not logic in the sense of that makes sense. Logic in the sense of what it's made of. So logos is the idea of examples, evidence, organization, choices that make up the text. Think about its materiality, right? What are the elements of it? If you can name it, it's probably an element of the text and it has an equal sign, right? All these things add up, right? The word choice, the stylistic features, point of view, literary devices, formatting, these things all add up to the text we experience. So think about what makes the text look the way it does. What kind of examples are present? Pathos. 2 examples of appeals to the audience's emotions. Really, it's just appeals to the audience, right? So how do we kind of get to the audience? What kinds of examples are they appropriate? If I'm writing about constitutional law, as Abrams does, what kind of examples do I need to make my point? That's my main point in the earlier question. Or if I'm Bartolome, what kinds of things do I need to bring up as examples to attach my reader to my text, to make it a connection there, right? Finally, a mini review. So write a brief review of the text that tells other people, how you experienced it, or kind of like almost like a book recommendation. Think about it like 100 words of why does this text, do what it does, and how good is it? Who should read it? Keywords finally. What are 3 terms or concepts that you think are singular to this article? What are they? What do they mean? And how do they function here? Tell me what page number you found them on, and that's it. Once you press the submit button, it's done, and we'll review them and get you feedback on them. But remember, the takeaway here for the rhetorical reading notes is pretty focused. You're trying to practice reading texts, reading articles, reading book chapters in ways that help you think about how you read generally. You could take these 10 questions down somewhere else to a biology class, an engineering class, and practice them in other places. You might have to change the questions a little bit, but you're asking questions about the rhetoric of the text. This helps us with our very next step, right? As we start thinking about the actual rhetorical analysis. That rhetorical analysis asks you to build from these notes. So if you've considered these questions, you're ready now to start thinking about the rhetorical analysis. How does the author use logos, ethos, pathos, kairos to persuade the audience? And you want to be thinking about, well, what is the author doing in terms of choice? Texts don't exist in the wild. Human beings put them together. They make choices to make those texts work. So what are the choices at stake here, and how effective are they? That's the question you're trying to ask. Can you judge this text and tell somebody else how well it does the thing it's trying to do? That's the analysis.